My name is David Lyon. I'm speaking to you from the Surveillance Studies Centre at Queen's University in Canada. And what I want to talk about is social media surveillance. Being watched and watching. Both parts are important, and I want to suggest why they are significant in this context. Social media, as we're well aware, is a very rapidly growing phenomenon around the world, and it's one that has exercised the imagination of many investigative journalists, social scientists, and so on. And a lot of work has been done in North America and Western Europe in particular, but there's also important work beginning in North Africa, China, Japan, Southeast Asia, and other parts of the world. So understanding what's happening in different places is going to be very important. Most of my focus, however, is going to be on North America and Western Europe. Social media users participate in surveillance in two major ways. They participate in the sense that they disclose data online. They post things, they put images up, and in many ways they are thus participating in the practice of surveillance by corporations, by the social media platforms themselves, and by other agencies. So that's one way in which they participate. But the other way in which social media users appear to be participating in surveillance is that they are doing it themselves. Now, you may question whether that really is surveillance, but of course, any kind of purposeful activity where personal data are concerned must come under some definition of surveillance. In terms of organizations, we think of a focused and routine attention to personal data for certain kinds of purposes, such as care, protection, entitlement, management, and so on. But in the case of social media users themselves participating in surveillance, we shall see that there are other purposes that they have in mind. But I suggest they are no less surveillant than those in organizations who are better known as the surveillors on social media. In 2012, VisionCritical, Canadian polling company, in conjunction with the Surveillance Studies Centre, conducted a survey with 1,000 respondents in each of Canada, the United States, and Britain. And what we were trying to do was to understand both kinds of social media surveillance, and thus the questions were geared to eliciting responses that would tell us about both sides of the coin. It revealed much about both kinds of surveillance, and where questions have been raised elsewhere, it tallied with other findings, especially from the Pew Internet and American Life findings from their various surveys. Now, of course, all social media are surveillant by definition. The social media platforms exist in order to garner personal data, personal information from the users of those social media sites, and to process them, to trade them, to use them in various ways for commercial purposes and secondary purposes that may go beyond the commercial. And for many users, of course, the idea is a long way from what we think of as user-generated data. That puts all the focus on how we generate the data and what we are doing with it, as it were. But we have to remember that social media is always surveillant. And what is done with the corporations is to extend the kinds of geodemographic and database marketing that have been going on for several decades in the more general marketing sphere, but only more recently have come online in a massive way through the development of social media. Social sorting that occurs commonly in surveillance contexts continues to occur here, but a lot of the work is taken out that was previously done by the corporations themselves or the other agencies who are doing the surveillance. Because what happens on social media is that users themselves contribute to the categories. Every time something is posted, every time a new keyword appears, every time there is something that gives a hint about how that user might be located within a category of consumption or of political interest or religious affiliation or taste in music, whatever it happens to be, that helps to create the categories that the marketers are using on social media. So the form of social sorting is, in a sense, more participatory using social media. Well, the VisionCritical survey confirmed various things that are quite well known. For example, and perhaps this is the most important, that younger users predominate. And indeed, many of the responses that I'm going to discuss are ones that relate to the younger users, that is 18 to 35 age group. And one can also comment on the ways that the obverse is true, that these findings apply less to people in older age groups. So, for example, younger users tend to be more willing to share their data with companies, for example, to download applications that might allow them to be tracked geographically. When it comes to what users think about the kinds of surveillance that is going on, a majority definitely object, especially to the ways in which internet service providers might allow their data to be used by others without warrant. This is something, of course, that has been going on in a number of countries, attempts by governments to oblige internet service providers to produce information, produce data, personal data that is usable by police and intelligence services without going through the courts, without an actual police warrant. And so this is something that is particularly sensitive and has been over the years 2010 through 2012 and is likely to continue into the future. So it does appear that many social media users are unhappy with the kinds of ways in which corporations might use their personal data, and especially if they share them with third parties. And this is quite clear from the findings. Yet from other questions that we asked, it does appear that only a minority has a clear idea of how to actually protect their data when they go online. So there are some complexities here where people might say that they wish to resist the effects of others collecting data on them without their knowledge and consent, but at the same time they don't really know what steps they can take in order to make a difference and to prevent their information being more widely circulated. But then if we turn to the other case, that is the matter of social media users themselves doing surveillance online, using their platforms. We were interested in this, and we asked a specific question about whether users would track or monitor others online. And this goes beyond the other purposes for which you might be using social media, the familiar ones of communicating with others, keeping in touch with friends, posting images and other information online for others to see. Beyond that, we wanted to ask a question about tracking and monitoring, very deliberately chosen words in order to try to elicit responses. And we were surprised to discover that a third in each of the 3 countries that we were looking at admitted that they tracked and monitored others online. Now, you may think that this is a leading question, something that, well, of course, if there's an opportunity to say something like this, then it can be included in other kinds of activities that are happening online. So we asked further questions in order to try to elicit a bit of a response to that question in a more nuanced way. We asked, for example, what the users thought others would think of their tracking and monitoring them online. And the majority in each country said that they believed that those who were being watched by them would be embarrassed or unhappy to know that they were being thus monitored by others. So it seems to us that although there's a lot more work to be done here, there is something significant in the idea that social media users are checking up on others in quite intimate ways online for whatever purpose. This was only a survey. We didn't have focus group activities, and of course we didn't have access to ethnographic data on what sorts of things people actually do. This can be looked at, for example, with other kinds of studies that have included those. Dana Boyd, for example, has done some interesting and important work of an ethnographic and focus group kind that follows up on related questions. Interestingly, about 60% of people who are social media users think that looking at others' information online is fair game. It's out in the public domain, why not? But at the same time, about 60% also believe that such tracking and monitoring, if done to them, is an invasion of privacy. So there are some curiously, perhaps contradictory findings here, at least ones that deserve further investigation and that we need to think through more carefully. So then, social media users evidence complex kinds of responses to surveillance of their own online activities, but their attitudes to different kinds of surveillance online also elicit different kinds of responses. There are complex responses, both in relation to the surveillance of us, social media users, by corporations, and then by extension, government departments, the police, intelligence agencies, and so on, but also similarly complex responses, and sometimes apparently contradictory ones, to the question of we as social media users doing our own surveillance online. In the details of the survey, which will be published and be put in the public domain very shortly, we compare some of these findings. We compare and contrast the corporate intelligence, police surveillance occurring on social media, and we try to work through the possible implications of those different kinds of responses. It would seem that many users are unaware of the extent to which their data are visible to others, let alone, and perhaps more importantly, the consequences of such visibility. Many do take some steps, even though they're not sure what are the best ones, to try to protect their online activities, to try to guard their data, or to try at least to negotiate their visibility online. A significant number of social media users, as I say, track or monitor others and are aware that that interest might be unwelcome to those others. How this fits with other concepts, other ways of theorizing surveillance, is a good question. So, for example, one could ask how far this goes with Mark Andreevich's work on lateral surveillance, as he calls it, peer-to-peer surveillance, where he focuses particularly on possible power relations between the different users of social media. Or one could ask how it relates to the work of Anders Albertslund, who has done work on what he calls participatory surveillance. And in this case, he's emphasizing that on social media, surveillance can often be seen as something which is empowering, something which is fun, something in which people explore their identities. And so there are at least two interpretations here that are somewhat in tension. And we'd have to discuss further exactly what is going on from the findings that we made, looking at that user-generated, as it were, surveillance that is done as people track and monitor others. So there's a lot more research to be done here. When it comes to those apparently contradictory findings, what are we supposed to conclude? Do we conclude perhaps that different contexts are very subtly interpreted in ways that elicit different sorts of responses? The work of Helen Nissenbauer, for example, or Julia Cohen would each be people who would be work that would relate to the question of that context and what is thought to be okay to disclose in one context, but not in another. Again, further work needs to be done here. Another question we might have to ask is the extent to which, if indeed it is the case that people are tracking and monitoring others online in this participatory or perhaps lateral way, would this lead to the possibility of other kinds of surveillance being more normalized, more naturalized, taken to be just an okay part of everyday life? There's evidence of this in other places as well, and so it's worth asking the question as to whether fun surveillance might help to naturalize other kinds of surveillance, which may actually carry with them the potential for greater harms than that which is engaged in by ordinary users online. Myself, I wonder whether the kinds of things that I've been discussing are evidence that there is a culture of surveillance which is growing, certainly in some countries, where not only is there general organizational surveillance, perhaps from the nation state through government departments or police intelligence agencies, as well as that consumer surveillance which gave rise to the thought that we live in surveillance societies. I want to ask the question, does the kind of data that we're looking at in this study lead us to believe that there is the development of a surveillance culture, at least in some countries? A culture where a surveillance mentality, if you like, and surveillance practices are growing among broad swathes of the population. Whatever the case, it seems to me that this underscores the need for a development not only of further studies of what is happening online, and especially using social media, but the need for more ethical approaches that raise questions that go beyond the technical and the legal that tend to dominate discussions of privacy online. It seems to me that there needs to be a concern for the digital other, and that is something that would affect both ordinary social media users doing surveillance and corporate bodies as well. A concern for the digital other seems to me to lie at the heart of the new kind of ethic of online activity that is called for. And of course, alongside that, various kinds of broader online education to try to help people understand the sorts of things that are happening online, not just where their data go, but what sorts of consequence they have for ordinary people. These questions seem to me to be paramount. So, social media surveillance, being watched and watching, much more research to be done along these lines. Thank you very much.